All right, well, welcome to the Regenerative Rising Podcast, elevating voices, activating change. I'm your guest host, Jessie Deelo. So this is my first time hosting this podcast, and I'm honored to be joined by two exceptional leaders in agriculture today. June and Angie Provost founded Provost Farms in New Iberia, Louisiana, as an agriculture operation and activism hub to preserve the ancestral legacies of South Louisiana's Black and brown farmers and farm workers. They provide resources that promote land equity and food security to assist in effective change towards justice for all people. June and Angie, welcome.
Hi, Jessie. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for having us here today.
Thank you.
It's good to have you both here. So I imagine it's pretty quiet on the farm today, but are you already getting ready for the season?
We are. So I know it's been in the news frequently and lately. So we've just got over some really harsh weather conditions. So within the next coming weeks, we'll be doing some damage assessments and just checking out what's going on with the crops and the garden and all of that. So far, the garden stuff looks pretty good. We planted some pretty hardy winter crops, and we just read an article. June was talking about an article from the Sugarcane League saying that the ground conditions, the temperature of the ground conditions didn't really go below a point where the crops should be extensively damaged. So
we should know more probably in about 2-3 weeks. So the temperatures are starting to warm up. And this is our favorite time of the year. Yeah. So it's like right now it's a beautiful day. I just want to be out there and touching the soil. So
exactly.
Yeah, but we'll know more in a few weeks. So
yeah, and just to give everyone a heads up, we are certainly not the size farm that we once were. But we're trying to make up for that in sharing our story and our mission to fill in that gap of all those acres that were lost to us or stolen from us. So but this time of year is certainly one of our favorites.
And I'd just like to add on to that. I would kind of feel not embarrassed, but kind of almost embarrassed, I guess I would say, because I was once this, close to 5,000 acre operation, and now we're, under 100 acres. But for the longest time, that bothered me, because I lost that many acres. But we're making the best of the acres that we have and making a statement and doing well with it. We're just trying to push what we can out of it. So
yeah, and hopefully recover what we've lost, but move forward in a way that is certainly provides equity, not only to ourselves, but to our community, and also is climate friendly and adjust for a more environmentally sound practice here, because we live in the monoculture area of sugarcane, right? And so that certainly comes with a lot of issues and problems, especially for Black and brown communities. So you're not just talking about a wealth depletion, you're also talking about health and physical and emotional traumas and stress. So
I June, going back to that, the shrinking size of the farm, and I was a really small scale farmer, and when we went from 5 acres to 20 acres, that was a big moment of pride. Mm-hmm. And I do remember that year that we had to pull back, so we'd lost so much in Superstorm Sandy, and it just gets you, right in the gut. You don't feel like you are what you thought you were supposed to be. And
exactly. And for the longest time, I felt like I know deep down inside I'm a farmer. I'm always going to be a farmer because that's what I love. It's my passion. But for a while, it makes you feel like you're not a farmer. It makes you feel, I'm embarrassed. It brings a lot of emotions, but
Yeah, and it's sort of that long historical, I always tie what June has gone through to that long historical problem in America of emasculating the Black male too, right? Making them feel less than, or making them feel as failures or inadequate providers. And so we certainly are trying to shed light on that. He's very open about his experience with depression and anxiety and all of these things, like sometimes he said, like even in the 1619, he said that sugarcane, he considered the plants his babies, right? So if you can imagine losing all of those acres of crops, that was like, I'm not saying that equating that to human life, but it was sort of like losing a part of himself. And I'm glad that he's able to communicate that, because it's been a healing process for both of us in his ability to share his experience and his emotions. I
mean, and I always try to tell people, be vocal about your emotions, because it's not easy to do. It definitely wasn't easy for me to come out and tell all of this, but it helped us, and it helped so many other people that's been reaching out to us too as well. Especially for Black men, and just, we feel like we have to do everything and do it right and work so much harder to get it done. So, and
never receiving anything for that work, hardly receiving anything for that work. So
but being vocal really was a healing process.
Yeah. And I remember the first time we did this, a few months ago, I followed up with an email with you guys to say, thank you so much for your rawness and your honesty, because it opens up things for people like me, and going, hey, I got to face up to being a Jewish woman and what it was like to grow up, where I did. And so thank you for being open about that. Cause I think a lot of us don't, we don't just go down through the layers and really understand why we are the way we are, so that we can go through that process of healing and renewal. So,
I think oftentimes there's always, that quote unquote fragility in speaking about issues and traumas of race and discrimination. Folks will often gaslight you and say, well, you're creating more division by bringing those topics up. But in actuality, it drives us more together. It makes us recognize what we have in common and the things that we can do to build a better society for humanity, for us all. And so, we're excited and very thankful. We feel very blessed to have the ability to share our story. Like oftentimes that can come with some reprisal and retaliation, right? But we always tell people we've experienced real reprisal and retaliation while we were actively farming, right? And so what we experience now, there are like any hate messages on social media, which they're not really, but if there are any types of issues like that, that's in no comparison to like a bank representative parking in front of our field, or tractors getting shot at, or dead animals in equipment. That's real retaliation, right? So we always want to encourage people, by sharing your story, you're able to shed some light on what you actually experienced, right? And get that out there in the stratosphere so that other folks can like galvanize around you and create a system of support.
Yeah, because it's hard to watch other people's vulnerabilities, you're right? Because whether you acknowledge it or not, you are starting to recognize your own. And that might put you into a place of either defensiveness or empathy or confusion. So, it's a real limb to go out on. But the more that we're able to do it and become more normalized about that, I think we're all the better for it.
Exactly.
So I remember, spring on our farm, or any of the farms when I worked for others, it felt like this renewal, it's always a sense of optimism. Whatever happened last year, well, that can't happen again, right? It's going to be a little bit different. You're always hoping, this plan this year is going to be better. What are you guys looking forward to this year?
So I think aside from like just everything blossoming and coming out of the ground in springtime, I think what we're mainly looking forward to are the projects that we're working on with our local university, and also with a few brands and mission-driven companies, right? So we're working on a project for improved homestead and heritage center sites, right? So that means we are looking forward to developing the idea of how do we incorporate eco-friendly design to our area, especially for Black and Brown people. And that means we're in rural communities, we're tied to farmlands, garden areas, and all of that. But oftentimes our homesteads are neglected. We live below the floodplain. And so Black farmers, or the issues of Black and Brown farmers is not isolated to just the crops. It's also incorporating your livelihood in your homesteads, right? But we also want to acknowledge the story and the historical contributions that our people have made for multiple generations, right? So we want to be able to tell our story in a way that's beautiful and create a safe space and a beautiful place to have that story told. So that is an awesome project that we're working on, but we're also working with different mission-driven brands and companies that we can build what is called Project Revival. We're looking to rebuild, again, the Black and Indigenous farmers of South Louisiana, especially in the sugarcane industry, because we're almost non-existent, right? We're at a state of emergency and something has to be done. So those particular projects drive us, like they excite us. We're up until like 1, 2 o'clock last night working on some numbers for a common friend of ours, Kevin. And so we were like doing things like that. And, it's just been awesome. I mean, we're like so excited to see what will come of this. And actually Wednesday, we'll have a yard full of college students doing renderings and sketchings of our home, or June's mother's home. And then our house that was foreclosed on, we're hoping to regain that through either litigation or some philanthropic support. And so they'll be doing some sketches and renderings of that. That way, like folks like you could come and visit us and be comfortable and see the farm and feel what it's like to embrace this country air here in Louisiana.
And when Angie says it drives us, it really, really, really drives us. Like last night, we were just talking about like the project probably from like 9 o'clock. And before we knew it, it was almost like 1 o'clock. But it was like, I just wanted to keep going. It's just like of course, I'm excited to get my hands dirty in the soil. That is priority for me. But to have something like this project in this Heritage Center and pay respect to all the, Black and Indigenous farmers that was before us. I mean, that is huge to me. I mean, that is, not only my family's farming legacy, but so many in the community. So, I mean, it really drives us just to keep going every day. I mean, it really, really, really does.
Yeah, so talk a bit more about how you're organizing with other producers or other communities, because I think we make all of these assumptions. So white people make all of these assumptions that everybody who's not us, likes each other, talks to each other, is organizing together. But that's just not how it is. It's, so help me understand, how you work, to organize communities who may have a similar story, but a different approach or different goals. How do you build that movement?
Listening to each other is the first thing, right? Being able to connect with one another and listening to each other. And I think the key thing that all people need to know is that when you are like a mission-driven, either person, individual, company, or brand, I think that in order to provide true reparations to our communities, you have to meet us where we are, right? If that makes sense. And for us, when we have folks, other organizations or other producers that are meeting us where we are, that conversation sparks up ideas and just plans of action and advocacy for the betterment of our community. So I think that, I know that's a long-winded answer, but I think just generally, in order for us to quote unquote cooperate with other organizations or producers, we have to listen to each other's needs listen to each other's experiences and move forward in that way. That's been the best way for us to move forward and connect a group or community of support for one another. June and I, certainly in our times when we were like in our darkest days, like I can remember in 2014 when he found out his banker was photocopying his signatures to loans, right? And then he goes into this contract dispute with the local sugar mill. And that felt like we had no organizations or outreach or support. Because when you're faced with like even our HBCUs or our legacy organizations here, they also have a heavy hand that's holding them from assisting us the way that they are designed to do, right? So it makes everybody feel isolated and divided. And those are, you can pretty much say those are residuals from plantation economics of prior to emancipation. You know, those are antebellum tactics, right? And so we were very, very depressed, very anxious of everything the next day's coming. We were just trying to live day to day. But we simply just kept on pushing and reaching out to whomever we could. We were finally led to the National Family Farm Coalition, members of the Federation, the National Black Growers Council, different organizations. Not one of them is better than the other. That has always been our thing. Everybody has had their equal contributions to helping us being lifted up or uplifted, right? And so I think when you're going through such stresses that June and I have gone under, that's very important. And recognizing that each organization has a contribution to bring to your life. Everybody can contribute something, and we can contribute back to their organizations as well. It's still an issue on getting farmers to speak up about their experience, because many of us are afraid of reprisal, right? We're afraid of retaliation, and that threat is very real. So we're still working through that process.
But so many farmers like have reached out and like messages on these social media, and the first thing to see, you know, I have a similar story. It might not be as rough as yours, but you know, and their stories are similar. I mean, there's so many farmers going through this. I mean, it's and just to have that support, you know, knowing that we can talk to each other and kind of help each other at the darkest moment, that means a lot. Yeah,
social media helps people collect together greatly, right? So we're thankful for that outlet. Many of our previous generations, our parents, grandparents didn't have that, right? And so social media not only allows us to collect together, but it also helps us to get some of the resources and education that we need to sort of fill in those gaps. I know there's a lot of bad stuff out there, but there's also definitely a lot of good.
Sounds like humanity.
Very much. Yes. It definitely is a reflection of who we are.
Absolutely. I want to dig into the supply chain stuff a little bit, because you know that's the place that, you know, our work kind of overlaps. So, you know, and I've reached out to you guys over the last month or two about this. So I'm hearing food companies express interest in sourcing from BIPOC farmers. But it's not that easy. It's not like I just call up this broker or supplier and say, add this, you know, spec to the product I'm looking for. It's just very complicated and very difficult. And I want to talk about that, you know, because I want you to help me understand, for these mission-driven food companies that want to use their buying power for good, what do they need to know that needs to be solved and addressed in order to create this thriving, you know, BIPOC supply chain that is able to scale and be fully integrated and on the same platform as all crops that are being marketed today?
Of course. So I think it goes back to what I was saying when the companies and brands need to meet us where we are, right? First of all, you have to recognize we're landless, right? We're pretty much at a breaking point of land ownership and resources. Second of all, a lot of us are broke, right? And because of the predatory lending schemes that have been happening for centuries or for decades, we are our credit worthiness has been damaged, right? So meet us where we are, recognize those things that are needed to actually bring reparations. So it's not just about purchasing goods from us or doing those things, but it's about also helping us get the financing and the infrastructure we need to add those specs to our products, right? To add that, quality, sustainable goods to the market. And so I think it's like a multi-tiered aspect of it, but also brands also need to start advocating along with, we need to start sending more lobbyists to DC talking about how USDA policy, actually current USDA policy has a very negative impact on Black farmers, right? In order to participate in some EQIP programs, you have to have a decent amount of production. You have to be the large guy, right? In order to participate in conservation resources at the USDA. And that is a major problem. For example, in order to, so right now the USDA is actually paying farmers to do a no burn policy here. So at the end of harvest season for sugarcane, so you know, have you seen pictures like in Florida or Louisiana at the end of the season where you see these large plumes of smoke and fire just infiltrating neighborhoods, ash, dust, all of that, creating breathing problems, respiratory problems, and so on. Well, in order to participate in the no burn policy, which you would get paid for from the USDA NRCS, you have to harvest your crop with a combine. A combine is a highly mechanized piece of equipment, right? In order to harvest your crop with a combine, you either have to have a custom harvest contract with the mill, or you have to be able to afford a almost $500,000, if not more, vehicle. Now, that is an issue. That is especially an issue for Black and Indigenous farmers in South Louisiana. That is why we're nearly non-existent, right? We've been driven through these predatory lending schemes, through reprisal and retaliation, out of business. And to even just think about getting them back to the operation of farming and cultivating the land, we have to start thinking about, what do we actually need in terms of resources, right? So we need more than just brands coming to us saying, hey, we want to source from Black and Indigenous farmers. Well, you've got to meet us where we are. And where we are is oftentimes tethered to the bottom. What can you do? The question that I want to be asked is, what can we do to lift you up? Give me that general question of what can we do to lift you up? And then we can get into these conversations that we've had with others about what's actually needed for us.
And for me, I think it's two more things I'd like to add. I mean, one, build a relationship. I mean, just don't come there that one time and say, okay, we need something, and then you never hear from them again. We need a multiple year relationship, because it's not going to work if you just come there at one time. You know, whatever happens, it happens, if the relationship is there or is not. We need a built-in relationship. And two, for me, is representation matters. Mm-hmm. I know if they're just putting a face on a box or something like that, that's not really doing anything. But for Black farmers, we never get to see that. So to have the next generation want to become farmers, those kids need to see representation on that box. They need to see that there is Black farmers out there. And that is powerful. Even still for me, I still consider myself a young farmer. That is needed. The representation is needed. You need to see people like me on those boxes. Mm-hmm. And we need to have relationships. That is the key. We have to have strong relationships.
Yeah, it's just like with anything. I mean, like I always say, you know, oftentimes in corporate America, the personal and professional relationships, because you're constantly working with one another, they sort of melt together, right? And so that's, I think, something that has been lacking for us because people have not found us worthy of investment, either in money or time. And so I think that is what is like really needed. And I think that we hope that comes across in our messaging of what type of resources can be provided to folks like us.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important one. I want to add one more as a question to you is, the role of certifications. Because I'm seeing that a lot of the mission-driven companies that could do this, are dedicated to it, share this mission and know how to show up, they're organic. And so they want a regenerative organic. Can you speak to why that road is so much harder for where you are compared to others? And I know you all had a success last year in achieving a sustainability certification, right? That will hopefully improve marketability.
Well, actually, we haven't achieved it yet. We're working on that, and that'll be for the sugarcane crops, right? But in terms of like organic certification, that's something we strive to achieve, right? But of course, a lot of that is timing and cost. And again, we're placed with those specific hurdles of either being surrounded by a monocultural type environment, growing environment where crop dusters are flying over our heads on a daily or whenever it is time to spray the fields, or the fact is just it's timely and costly to get certain certifications, right? But that all goes back to policy, right? So we all have to be very cognizant of what policies are regulating what and how we can improve upon the financial and land resources for Black and Brown people, not just in South Louisiana, but throughout the country. Because many of us, like I said, we are often tethered to the bottom. We are in a place where at times, if we're meeting in a space, we're often the only Black or Brown person in the room, where there's, like June saying, lack of representation. So I think that in order for like a full and complete answer to your question, there has to be more of us in the room to discuss the issues of what's going on, right? And so, I mean, just from bottom line for us, it's timing and cost. And so we have to have the equipment to support improvements to the land. We have to have access to, renewable sources of energy, all of these things that can be used to improve either the homesteads or the farms. Now, we're working on that. We're working on that on a very scholarly level right now with the university, but then we're also working with that with other mission-driven companies. But I mean, it's right now it's June and I. We hope to expand it to other people. And then once we expand it to other people in our community, it will just be us in South Louisiana. And we're thinking of ways of how can we do that for everyone. But it'll take more than just companies and individuals. It will take policy correction, right? Like it will take policy reform in getting all those things properly doled out to us as a community.
But we are making steps, though. I mean, It's just, I mean, even things like in the sugarcane world, I mean, small steps matter. So yes. We're starting and we're trying to, really hone in on it and try to get it done. So
yeah.
So as this like regenerative movement, it continues to gain momentum, and we're starting to see more corporate food companies, challenger brands, the regional brands, trying to integrate these principles into their sustainability strategies, their sourcing programs, but we're still struggling to create opportunities that are truly equitable, that allow for all farmers to have access to this regenerative opportunity. What do you believe? And I think you've mentioned it a few times, so maybe I'm just kind of looking for that finest point, but what do you believe needs to be done to integrate equity and justice into the regenerative agenda?
I guess we could go back to again, for us, a lot of the issues that we are facing has to deal with policy, right? So just for example, for June and myself, let's just say that, again, companies come to us and say they want to source from us, right? Do we actually have the money and the resources to produce the product that they need? That goes back to the answer of it. Oftentimes, for many of us as Black and brown farmers, being no, right? If you're a company who's looking for a certified stamp on your product or something like that, oftentimes it will be where we are lacking in that sort of field or aspect of farming. But that traces back to U.S. policy. So, for instance, many of us have been stripped of our farms, again, through predatory lending schemes, through, issues with the Commodity Credit Corporation, where they're lending to these large factories that are oftentimes just pushing out pollution into our neighborhoods and our communities, but at the same time, they're also discriminating against Black farmers, right? So that's slowly driving us or quickly driving us further down and away from our farmland. So there needs to be more punitive policy on those who are practicing discrimination. There needs to be issues of statute of limitation laws that where we can go and turn around and say, hey, I know I was discriminated against 10 years ago, but the statute of limitations has expired. We need to expand those statute of limitations, especially in the circumstance of discrimination and retaliation and racism, because of the fact that we are oftentimes it's a continuing effect, right? And that is certainly not acknowledged. And that goes back to the fact that in order to integrate us into the regen ag movement, we have to first, I guess, acknowledge our historical role in the system in helping to actually facilitate what regen means, but also making sure that by acknowledging the role, we redress some of the key issues that forced us out, right? And then be able to come up with solutions that would allow easement of us into that field or that part of agriculture.
And then again, I know we touched base on it a lot too, but just the support of brands. I mean, that is huge in this. I mean, to have the support of brands, they can really change this whole concept of it. They can really have a huge part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And are you following the Justice for Black Farmers Act? Do you think that has, the capability to move this conversation forward?
It's already moved the conversation forward, mm-hmm. right? So that is the best thing that we can think of in terms of bringing something to the floor other than just pure reparations, right? And so it's allowed for many of us to feel confident in saying, hey, we need these things, these types of resources in policy, right? But it also holds our politicians to a certain standard that if you're not talking about this, if you're not having this on your line item or your stratosphere of discussion, we won't support you, right? And it allows us to create means of discussing better pathways and better legislation for us and next generation. So yeah, we're super excited about it.
And I got a phone call when I emailed that bill to my brother, and he, when he read it, he called me and said, that's a possibility of getting my son, maybe one day he can get 160 acres and we can go, it can go back into farming. I mean, he was so excited that it's a possibility of getting his young son, my nephew, into farming. I mean, to hear that was just, it was so exciting because, it gets us all excited to the possibilities of what could happen, what really could be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, making sure we have another generation of farmers is so, so important. And, I see a lot of what's happening, across the landscape and with the regenerative movement, with all of the good intentions. I just keep reminding people, like, we need 3.4 million farmers and then some if we are going to have the innovation potential we need to solve the climate crisis that we're facing, that we're in right now. And I know that, you guys know this, but the historical and indigenous practices that we have been using on this land for thousands of years have real value. But how do we understand? How do we find the folks that know how to do that work, who are kind of in touch with that ground because they've been there for generations, and help us kind of solve this next problem, or at least manage through it, cohesively?
Yeah. And I mean, oftentimes we're doing those things like June and I, we're not certified organic, but our gardens it's certified for us, right? So, and that's sort of like historically what you'll find in Black communities here, right? Like my grandparents, they were organic before it was a thing, right? And so, and a lot of times that's what you'll find. Like, we're doing these practices, but they're not monetized for us. And we need to figure out a way that they're monetized and keeps us on the land. And you're correct. We need more family farms, more individual farms to practice these things. I oftentimes see, and this is certainly a thing that I've seen on social media, talking about the myth of the family farmer. Of course, there's a myth of the family farmer, and that at times you can't expect family, quote unquote, small farms to save the ag industry. But I always tell people, you can expect, I bet you some Black farm families will save the ag industry, because we do things that are very oftentimes very eco-friendly, quote unquote, sustainable or regenerative for us, because that is our only source of either food or ways to maintain our livelihoods. And so we have to think of ways just out of just basic survival needs of how do we keep our gardens going? How do we keep our livestock going? Those types of things. So yeah, and again, that goes back to having us in the conversation, right? So getting us out of that, that inability of providing sustainable livelihoods for ourselves, and moving us into a way that we move just beyond the basic needs of survival, that we can actually contribute to the conversation in a way that is respectful and legitimized in some sort of official way, so.
Yeah, I think, like, we talk about this word like resiliency, right? It's one of those words we're using all the time right now. And I have two young kids, and my husband and I, we talk about this all the time. Like, how do we make sure that they are resilient people that grow up into resilient and strong adults? And part of that is just going through the pain. You have to struggle. You have to recognize your struggle, be aware of what worked and didn't work, and then do it again. And I think all farmers are resilient because we are still here today.
Yes.
Through these low prices. We've been through the 80s farm crisis. Like, if we are still here today, I think we've proven we're resilient. But I think the challenge is that we're changing the goal. The whole system and the policy framework that you all are functioning in has been built around efficiency and productivity. That's always been the goal. But now we realize that our goal needs to be sustainability and regeneration. But pivoting an entire policy agenda and our market approach to incorporate that goal is really, really hard. We don't have a system to work in that's going to allow us to be successful. And I think what we're trying to do right now is use carbon markets as this proxy, right? So we've got all this hype, a lot of money going into this space. I have never run into a farmer that said, man, I wish you would give me some ag tech software and a carbon market. I really want to sell this. So we're not addressing what the farmers' needs are. And the farmers that stand to gain the most from this are like large scale operators that are, fully ingrained in the commodity ag mindset, whether they want to be or not. And so it's not the small family farmers, it's not the BIPOC farmers who may already be using conservation ag practices that stand to benefit from this. And yet, some reason we've got ourselves really comfortable with the idea of a carbon market versus a policy agenda. And I'm kind of curious to hear from you two, like, do you think carbon markets are going to help, or are they going to further drive inequity in our system?
I think the way it stands now, it stands to bring further inequities, right? Because it's too costly for us and it often leaves us out. And I think that when companies are using, in carbon market, like that, you always hear the word sustainability and regeneration, all right? And reduce greenhouse emissions and all of these key talking points. But for us, at times it means a marketing ploy. And in order for that to truly be a point of your mission, again, you have to bring in the voices and the practices of Black and Indigenous people. And if you're not doing that, then you're truly not sustainable. You're truly not regenerative, because all you're doing is catering to a large corporate system, which oftentimes is abusive to people of color, right? And so I think that, as it stands now, I don't see if it doesn't improve, if there's greater outreach. If there's not greater outreach, I don't see how that can truly affect change in means of equity, climate justice, land justice, and food justice, right? And so I think that has to be a key point for us all.
Yeah, and I think the first time I heard that, was the first thing that came to my mind too, is the huge corporate farmers are going to benefit. The first ones for sure. And I mean, that was the first thing that came to my mind, because it's just not,
And they have increased voting power, right? The more money and access you give to them, they have increased voting power. So they have the authority or the say-so to reduce some of these laws that are in effect to help improve our climate. And so there's a great deal of disconnect from somebody who lives in a fancy quote unquote suburb while running their farm that's in another state and on a large scale, versus those of us who are still living on a few acres of a land that our grandparents purchased, right? And trying to live and survive that way while there's a big sugar factory in our backyard, or there's a chemical plant across the river. So I think that we have to be very considerate of, I think, brands and companies. The carbon market in general has to be very considerate and cognizant of our living conditions to truly be, again, sustainable and regenerative. Because if not, it's just, like I said, it's a marketing ploy. I mean, that's generally how we observe it and see it.
Yeah. And how are we going to get more people to this, proverbial table, right? Because, we know that, scale and power gets you access. And we know that the only way we're going to break that down and come up with something better, that I think there's great, ideas and people out there. How do we bring them to this table? Like, what are the specific mechanics of that process?
I think it's creating relationships, like June was saying earlier, professional and personal. So it's what's worked for us is that, managers of companies and brands and organizations reaching out to us, but then we learn about their personal lives, their kids, things day to day, like just really basic humanity, right? And so I think that is a very key point in moving forward. How do we build on this? How do we incorporate our voices in there? I think, again, when doing that also and discussing our needs, it goes back to the advocacy of and the activism of truly of knowing the disparities that are out there, right? And how do we have honest discussions on what's needed? So
yeah, I was about to say, just be honest, to be very vocal. I mean, just tell the truth. I mean, what we need, what's missing. I mean, all that are very important. Mm-hmm. You have to bring that to the table. I mean, you have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think about like what LeBron James does for schools in his home state. And I'm wondering if there are other examples of places that you find just super inspiring work that helps you identify that beacon of saying, that's the kind of impact I want to have, whether it's in agriculture or not. Can you think of like some inspiring examples that are helping you shape your framework and perspective?
What's inspiring to me is seeing Black women lead this movement of land and food justice, right? Like just Karen Washington, Leah Penniman, Jermaine Jenkins, all of these women, Tracy McCurdy at Acres of Ancestry, like all of these women, just like beautiful Black women just leading this pathway of justice and freedom, and actually being honest and open about what's needed. And so for me, that's like it gives me so much hope, and it motivates me to move forward and just get out of bed every day and make sure that my values are aligned with my daily activities, like just making sure that we move forward. And so, I mean, like in June and I, we look for inspiration in each other, right? And so, but yeah, just seeing what other folks are doing, what other females are doing with their own farms and their own activism is just like, we've got to be able to bring that here to South Louisiana. So
I just like to say women do run the world. Yes. I have to say that. but for me, like you said, LeBron James is somebody like I do look up to, because I mean, he's very vocal and what he's doing with the school. I mean, also Colin Kaepernick. To me, they scrutinize him all the time, but he still sticks to what he stands for. And
points to Ben and Jerry's for putting him on one of their ice cream.
And again, it goes to representation. So, I mean, if a brand puts somebody like that on their product, that means a lot. That really does mean a lot. And for me too, I also look up to somebody like Tim Pickford, who, we talk often, and that's somebody that, he tells me everything he went through, and and I'll tell him some things. I mean, and we talk about farming. So that is somebody I look up to as well. I mean, and I also say my dad was always my hero. So, that's my parents. I mean, but all in all, yes, that's definitely people we look up to.
Yeah.
And when I started learning how to farm, I was running a community garden project in Madison, Wisconsin. And there was a Black woman who was my boss. And yeah, we did some gardening, but we mostly sat there and had conversations about the value we bring to our work and the purpose that we have. And she talked a lot about her history in the South and growing up in the South, and why in Madison, Wisconsin, she was dedicated to these school garden programs, dedicated to working with at-risk youth to help them see the value of growing food for themselves. And that was such an inspiring human being in my life to know to stick with it. And from there, meeting Will Allen and the work he's doing in Milwaukee, and now Georgia and all over the place. Like, again, from adversity, comes great leadership. And, how do we lift people up so that they can be leaders like you guys in their local community?
Thank you. If it's not a blessing, it's a lesson.
This is a generous way of looking at hardship. Let's have one more question. And that is, for the average consumer. For the people that will just want to vote with their food dollar, they want to put their food dollar to good. What's your message to them? How do they activate from their position outside of agriculture?
I think supporting Black farmers directly. Black and brown farmers need support directly. Black and brown farm workers need support directly, right? So that means like either volunteering your money or your time, donating space and place and dollars to where we are. I think that's a great deal of assistance that's needed on the ground level, right? So, I mean, it's great to go out there and see products in your store that are Black or brown owned and support their businesses. But it's also a great idea to reach out to the farmers or the landowners on a direct level so that you know what people are needing. Because oftentimes it's not just food dollars that are needed, right? It's not just operational money for crops, but it's also, you could, like, if you're an accountant, pro bono financial assistance, right? If you're an attorney, pro bono legal assistance. There's all kinds of ways that we can cooperate in a reparative system for us. So I think that's very important to know. Oftentimes people are not sure, or a little bit trepidations on asking what's needed because you don't want to offend someone, right? But offering is always offering whatever you can, whatever talents you have, or whatever education or qualifications you come with. Offering your time and space, place, and dollars it's often needed. So.
And for me, this might sound a little lame, but I think just conversating with a Black farmer, just because I love farming, I can talk about it all day, all night. I just love when a person just asks this question. It doesn't necessarily have to be sugarcane, but sugarcane is my heart. But it's just talking about it, just showing that respect of each other. It means a lot. Just having conversations like this, it means a lot to us.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are, always looking for the one shot, like, just show me the one website I can go to and click all the, donate buttons or the activate buttons, or is that forming? I mean, I've found lists all over the place, but should we be pushing back and saying, why do you need a central location? Should you work harder for it? Or should we be creating central locations to make it easier? Or how do we get those two things to happen at the same time?
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it needs to be a combination of both, right? So again, it goes back to how we communicate with one another and how we establish our relationships with one another. But there certainly has to be a place. If there's someone like yourself out there or others who want to create a space where folks can donate or volunteer time for Black and brown farmers, that certainly has to be created. And we also have to be able to have the ability to facilitate that type of infrastructure for ourselves too, right? But it's a combination of work, I think, that in that aspect that has to be created for us all, because we're dealing with things that we have never properly addressed, right? So we're dealing with the days of enslavement. We're dealing with the days of assimilation. We're dealing with Jim Crow laws. We're dealing with all of these inequities and these actual violent issues against humanity. And we treat them so civilly, right? Like these are crimes against humanity, right? And so it will take a large portion of resources to provide reparations to folks, but it will also take community effort and real solidarity between all communities to come up with the right solutions that we need for all of us, right? And so, yeah, it's just like there has to be a combination of so many things to come in play.
Yeah, and we have to create a positive framework around the word reparations. Like, yes, this is about investing in people to make sure that they will be here to contribute their great ideas, their good spirit, their innovation, their solutions. If we don't invest in people through looking back and looking forward, it's going to be really hard to create the system that we want to see.
We've got to be able to also understand that reparations had already been doled out to the European peasant class, right? Through the USDA and the Homestead Act, right? And so we have to also talk about what is the fragility around the word reparations, and how are we using taxpayer dollars so wastefully now by continuing to allow institutions to practice racism, discrimination, and all of these things that are negatively impacting the climate around Black and brown communities, right? I certainly think that if we acknowledge and redress all of these historical wrongs and incorporate that into policy, we can actually create and effectuate change that's not only better for us, better for you, better for everyone around us, right? And also mostly better for the environment. And that's what we're looking to do. Like, I've never understood the negative connotation around reparations. Call it what it is. That negative connotation is a fragility that's out there, right? And so we have to be very aware of some of those things that are meant to gaslight our experience. And we certainly believe that reparations are needed. It's about paychecks, but it's about protecting those paychecks, right? Through policy. It's about protecting those resources that would be returned to Black, historic families that have been discriminated against, who have experienced reprisal, who are suffering inequities, but protecting those dollars and resources once they're handed out. So that means protecting the policy, protecting us from predatory lending schemes, from chemical plants or factories that want to set up in our communities and affect our environment, our food, and our land. And so, to me, reparations is a glorious word. It's a glorious word that needs to be implemented into actuality, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think the real opportunity with the regenerative movement is not about soil health or water quality, biodiversity, all that's important. But maybe it's more so about activating farmers to show up with their voice, about getting consumers to say, I want to hear that story, about helping brands step up and say, we want to do this. We can't do it. Look at all these barriers. No one company can fix this. Not even the global corporate companies. What we need is this massive policy change, because we need a different system to work in if we're going to address the challenges that we have facing us. And so I appreciate your focus on policy. I have been an allergic reaction to it myself, but I do see markets are not designed to change systems. Markets are designed to meet supply and demand and move products and go for efficiency and not worry about humans. But that's why we need policy. And that's why we need a government that's designed to take care of us.
Exactly. Like I can tell you, as Black people living in South Louisiana, we understand how policy negatively affects us, right? How improper policy action is such a detriment to our livelihoods. That's why we're so focused on it. It's beyond your access to voter rights, but it's understanding why voter rights are so important. It's understanding how dispossession of land and land theft are directly tied to the stripping of our access to vote for the proper people to represent us in the halls of Congress, in our local city councils, and so on, right? So it's like we're screaming from the mountaintops. Voter rights are intrinsically tied to who we are, and it all stems for us from the land, right? And our ability to be in a space and place that we can call home and live there safely in a safe environment that is truly sustainable, that is truly regenerative, that builds on the next generation. And so policy is key. Policy is so key. We don't do anything in America without policy. The roads that we drive on, the abilities to move our crops back and forth are all from policy, right? We walk out the door. I don't have to go through a colored entrance anymore because of policy, right? And so policy is so intrinsically tied and important. And I understand your reaction to say, oh, policy, because it's such a hard thing, right? But that also, you have to understand that it also comes from a place of privilege, right? Because people will look at us in a room and policy is geared towards someone who looks like you, not like us, right? And so it's very important that we as Black and Brown people understand that aspect of how policy is so important to our communities and our just individual personhood. We get so excited. I get excited talking about all types of policy changes I'd love to see. The Justice for Black Farmers Act is a great start. It is not pure reparations, right? So we cannot mistake that. But it is a great start. And with the Justice for Black Farmers Act, we also need to build solidarity efforts between Black and Brown communities so that we can address the issues of land dispossession, discrimination, and assimilation, right? In order so that we can fully and properly address those issues that are negatively affecting us financially, but also through the environment.
Yeah, she can talk about policy all day.
All
Yes,
day.
yes.
All day.
Well, I want to end here because I feel like you have empowered people to remember why they need to vote and why they need to care and why they need to activate. And so thank you both for talking with me today. And thank you for your leadership and your passion. Your contributions are critical for all of us today, as well as future generations that are hoping for this regenerative, resilient, and equitable future. So thank you for joining us in this episode of Regenerative Rising Podcast.
Thank you so much.
If anyone wants to learn more about June and Angie Provost and their work to cultivate ancestral and Indigenous crops for the purpose of promoting food and land justice, I encourage you to visit their website, provostfarmllc.com. So take care of each other, take action, be well.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.